And we are back on the 0 Hour. I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. It is, or you wouldn't think it would be, the best kept secret in modern life that work sucks by and large. But apparently, a lot of people don't realize that, which has been one of the reasons for the very favorable and deservedly favorable reception my next a guest's new book has received. She's been on the program before. I always look forward to speaking with her. Sarah Jaffe is a reporting fellow with the Type Media Center, and her new book is entitled, let me get this precisely correct, it is entitled Work Won't Love You Back, subtitle How Devotion to Our Jobs Keeps Us Exploited, Exhausted, and Alone. And sister, that ain't the half of it. So first of all, Sarah, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Well, it's a delight to have you back, and it's a delight to read this book, which I've been getting a great deal out of. So I guess I will start with the obvious question: what provoked you, inspired you to write it?
Yeah, as you know, and people who've been watching your show for a long time know, I'm a labor journalist, and this is sort of what I do day in and day out is cover work and the various ways in which work sucks and the things that people are doing to try to make work suck a little bit less. And so this book has been sort of hovering around in my mind for years and years. I actually had the idea about the same time as I started working on the first book. So that was like 2014, 2015. And I'm really glad that I did these in the order that I did, because I think the evidence has just sort of piled up, and the argument that I ended up making in this book about this idea of loving your job is much sharper for the fact that like the laborers of love are really not having it anymore in so many ways, right? So like the unionization numbers among journalists, among art museum workers, the number of nurses strikes that we've had in the last year, some of which are still ongoing, like the folks at St. Vincent in Massachusetts. All sorts of different field teachers obviously have been sort of leading the pack for a long time. All sorts of these fields where people are supposed to do the work for the love of it are standing up and saying, like, actually, we can't actually pay our bills on love. We don't want to be in our jobs 24/7. And we would like a break and better pay and some rest and relaxation and more support, please.
Yeah, I can't use the expression on the air, but it is a mind F something that we've played on now entire generations. I think of working people. When I saw your book was out, I immediately thought of it like regular listeners to the show, or I've written about it.
Yeah.
I keep coming back to the fact that I used to go to meetings at what was called the White House WeWork Center. It was really closer to the Treasury Department, which seems more appropriate. But the only people there who were required to wear the T-shirts which say, "Do what you love," were the cleaning staff.
Right.
And it struck me like this was the most grotesque. Not only did they have to spend their days cleaning up after self-indulgent capitalist hipsters, but they also had to, wear this freaking, see, Troy's pre-broadcast warning about language really applies now. Had to wear these, to me, had to wear these T-shirts, which to me seems so degrading. And to me that seemed like the ultimate, we not only have to make your profits for you and jump when you say jump and answer the phone at 2 a.m. and all that, but we have to love it. So as you can tell, I have strong feelings about that, and I suspect I'm not the only person who feels that way, right?
Yeah, I mean, WeWork, speaking of WeWork, it's kind of funny. I've got one sitting right here next to me, but we made tote bags for the book that have the WeWork font and just sort of emulate that god-awful WeWork thing. So if you don't mind a little bit of awful self-promotion there. Because like the WeWork shtick, right, is this sort of apotheosis of a few different narratives about like being your own boss. And isn't it great to be your own boss? And like having job security and things like that are just things of the past. And now all the cool people want to do what they love and therefore, pay rent to WeWork to have an office when normally your boss would pay for the office. And the way that like, then as you said, that like now this expectation is being foisted on like cleaning staff. And it was certainly a thing
Right.
when I was waiting tables, which I did for, a good 10 years of my life, that you had to show up with a smile. And if you weren't smiling and you weren't like telling your boss that you really loved serving sushi to strangers, it would be somehow like you were doing something wrong. You were insufficiently grateful to, having a $2.13 an hour job. It just is infuriating, right? When you think about it in real detail, the way that like every industry now sort of expects something of this, to the point of where like Amazon billboards are like, get a job delivering smiles. It's like, yeah, where you'll have to, pee in a bottle because you can't get bathroom breaks.
Right, right. And even, and this was a heartbreaking one for me because I've been extolling the virtues of Dolly Parton's genius
I
for 50
know.
years when nobody would
Dolly.
listen. And then there was this thing which I'm sure you know about. She did the great song 9 to 5 for the movie of the same
Mm-hmm.
name. And then she did this thing for, I forget what it was, some
Squarespace, I think.
Squarespace, right, where 5 to 9, where that's when you get to work for you, as if, isn't it great that in order to survive, you have to work double jobs,
Yeah.
neither one having any security? It's like, Dolly, 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 why, why?
See, this is why I
Um,
have George Michael behind me, because George Michael never gave up on the anti-work songs. I encourage everybody to go back and listen to Wham Rap because it's great. Yeah,
okay,
it was so disappointing, right? Because like 9 to 5 is such a great song about like
it's great.
work is bad actually. And then like the answer to that, and and 9 to 5 the movie is about women office workers organizing, and it's
It's
based in the actual stories of women like Ellen Bravo and Karen Nussbaum and people that we all
right,
know and love,
absolutely.
right?
It
Organizing
was been on
office
the
work.
show. Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah, it
yeah,
was so
and
great.
then to go to like, oh, and now we're just going to embrace this hustle. But it is sort of the perfect way to sort of explain how the story has changed in those years, right? Like that Dolly Parton song and movie are about as old as I am, right? Early 80s, 1980,
Uh-huh.
1981, something like that, right? About as old as I am. And in that time, the story has changed so much that it's now like, oh yeah, you have your side hustle. And that's just totally normal and expected. And we're supposed to like enjoy that. And,
Right. No, and
I've
and
been there,
and
I've done that. Journalism was my side hustle for years before I finally managed to make a living.
and and God bless you for doing it, because those of us who can actually scrape by at all on it, we're the
Yeah.
lucky few, right? And
Yeah.
but it reminds me of, and I talk about it, write about this a lot too, and so did David Graeber,
Yeah.
coincidentally, which
Goodness.
is, I'm old enough that when I was a kid, the popular cartoon was the Jetsons. And
Mm-hmm.
the premise of the Jetsons was that George Jetson, with a single salary, could raise a family of four, have a flying saucer shaped apartment in the sky, two rocket cars, and a robot maid. And because the assumption was that you didn't work because you loved it. You worked so that you could have a place to live
Yeah.
and transportation and food.
Yeah.
And the assumption was workers would benefit from a growing economy. So that's been thrown out the window. Now it's like, no, your pleasure is not going to be your flying car or, space adventures with your kids. Your pleasure is going to be slaving in the mines, because it's so insidious,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, although I always found the Jetsons funny because it was like, okay, you've got a robot maid, but somehow George Jetson still has to go to work. It
Two
was
hours a week. That's the point, Sarah. He
okay.
worked
Okay.
two
Well, I don't
hours a
remember how
week and
many hours a week
staged
George
these
Jetson worked.
sprockets. That's all it took, because,
Okay.
in 1968,
I'm gonna go back and rewatch the
productivity was
Jetsons now.
increasing, and it was, well, yeah, and it was shared. Productivity increases in 1968 were shared between workers and
Yeah.
and management,
Yeah. And then the graph
and
just diverged, right?
exactly.
Yeah. And so we're here now. And like all of the things that you used to get from work, i.e., a decent paycheck, weekends off, all of that stuff, those are creeping away. And instead, like the worse work gets, the more pressure is on us to love it. And I think that is very obviously not an accident, right? That the way to sort of incorporate the demands that workers were making in the 70s and in the 60s, right? For like less boring, less miserable work, that gets incorporated. And it's like, okay, we'll give you that. But in turn, we're going to deregulate your industry entirely. And now we're going to tell you that you're your own boss. But
Right.
you have no security, no stability. And obviously you're not your own boss. You just like have multiplied the amount of bosses that you have. Right. Like I always say to people when they ask what being a freelancer is like, I'm like, look, like I don't have a boss. I have like 30 bosses and a whole bunch of prospective bosses that if I'm lucky out there someday I get to work for. Right. The way that story is really bound up in industrial decline, and that has given us sort of new explanations for why we should work. And this argument that, sort of personal fulfillment will come from working really hard at our jobs comes alongside, Margaret Thatcher selling off council houses. Since I'm here in London, I have to think about that, right? And saying there is no such thing as society. And everything is personal and individual. And so you work for individual fulfillment, but you can't depend on anything. And if anything goes wrong, it's all your own fault. And this is sort of the core narrative of neoliberalism. And so in a way, thinking about writing this book, I was like, okay, this is a part of the story of neoliberalism that I think we haven't talked about as much. Is we've talked about like the declining job quality. We've talked about deindustrialization. We've even talked some about the shift to service work from industrial work, but we haven't talked enough about the way that this particular narrative got sold to sort of my generation and everybody younger than me. And I find it interesting because, again, like as a child of the 80s, I had the sort of mixed messages growing up. Like on the one hand, it was like, oh, you should, you can do whatever you want to do. You'll go to college and you'll get a good job and you'll be happy and you don't need to, you don't need to get married. That was my parents' sort of, 80s level feminism of don't worry about what the boys think, go get a good job. And at the same time, anytime I was like, oh, okay, well, I want to be a writer, my parents were like, you can't really do that. That's not a real job. So that kind of combination, I think is itself really frustrating.
Yeah, and I always like everything old is new again, right? And so I always think
that too.
welcome to the gig economy, welcome to the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, right? Where you get paid, you work as much or as little as you want, you get paid for every piece you sew, and welcome to the same push toward deregulation, toward de-emphasizing worker safety, towards de-emphasizing worker rights, but gloss it up with this kind of, the 1980s was also the time when people started glamorizing business, in the 60s and 70s, when I was a kid, I mean, business was like the dullest, least fulfilling career path you could imagine. Almost anything else would be better. And it wasn't just us, like, cool kids or uncool kids, nerdy kids who thought that. It was everybody. I mean, it was really, okay, he went into business, that's fine, he'll make a little money, that's nice, or she did, or whatever. But this suddenly we start glamorizing that life. And, I don't know exactly how it happened, Sir Jeff, but I feel like it wasn't planned, but it was really well planned, if you know what I mean, in the sense that I'm not aware of anybody scripting it out, but boy, it sure worked well for the money people.
Yeah, but I mean, it is sort of scripted out in a way, right? Like I didn't do a lot of this in researching this book, but like I sort of drew on people who had done the research in the management literature. And like there is this change in the sort of management, how to be a manager stuff in the 80s and 90s that is suddenly like all about intrinsic motivation and getting your employees to do more by convincing them to love the job more. And how do you sort of do that as a manager? And that kind of motivation, that's what this is all supposed to bring us, right? Like the New Yorker magazine, right? Which just had finally sort of got their union contract after 2 years and change of bargaining and almost going on strike. And, that they made signs in that wonderful New Yorker font that everybody recognizes, right? That just said, we can't eat prestige. Because like you have the one of the most successful and certainly one of the most prestigious, journalistic publications in the English language. And one of the only ones that as far as I can tell makes a profit, as opposed to needing to be bailed out by billionaires like most magazines and newspapers. And people who come into this thing, which is supposed to be producing this top of the line product, are being paid like 35, 40,000. This is supposed to be a job,
Right.
and
No,
it's just like, that's ridiculous, right?
I was amazed by that because I always thought, well, the really lucky journalists are the ones who get to like write for the New Yorker, and they get the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, get salary, research a story as long as they want, Jane Mayer, Robert McPhee, whomever. But the fact is that I should have guessed, right? I mean, when those stories came out, I should have guessed that there would be the privileged few that would,
Right.
like so many things, reflect the structure of society.
Yeah.
They're the privileged few, and then there are the others who work for nothing, like the Morlocks and the H.G. Wells, the Time Machine. There's like
Yeah.
every society
Yeah.
seems to have that. So
Yeah, and we're
you know what
getting
I'd
sort of
love?
more and more of that now, right? We've got like the billionaires are richer than ever, and everybody else is more screwed than ever. It's like, and now Jeff Bezos is going to space, so it's great.
Right, and so are two or three other
Oh, and Elon
billionaires.
Musk,
There,
yeah, my favorite people.
Elon Musk and Richard Branson. So
I always
yeah, I
forget
mean,
about
this
Richard
is
Branson. He's so
well,
90s.
yeah. Well,
Get
you've
with the
got the
program,
George
Richard
Michael poster,
Branson.
tea towel hanging behind you. So
I
so yeah,
know.
really, Virgin Records and all that. So Sarah, I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you about a couple of things specifically in the book, which I have in this
Yeah.
electronic device, which I hold in my hand. Because I highlighted a lot of it because I really was enjoying it so much. But one of the things you talk about a lot is love. We've
Yeah.
talked so far about business, about jobs, right? Work. But this notion of conflating work and love
Yeah.
is, well, it seems so kind of Pavlovian or something, first of all,
Mm-hmm.
because love is like a fundamental human impulse. It's
Yeah.
a communal impulse. It,
Right.
requires a minimum of two beings, to create a sort of circle of love. And yet they want to take this most fundamental, to me, I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
being Freudian or anything, but I just think it's a
Yeah. Yeah.
fundamental human emotion. They want to take it, and instead of loving, your spouse or your children or your parents or your pets or your
Yeah.
community, or they want you to love this non-human entity called a job, which to me, and
Right.
I love that you get to the question of love and
Yeah.
what it really is and what it's meant to be, because I feel that love is to work like the carrot is to the rabbit on the racetrack. You know what I mean? It's like,
Exactly. Yeah.
so tell us a little bit about, and
Yeah.
you quote the great Sylvia Federici a couple times on the
Yeah.
subject, but tell us about love and work, if you would.
Yeah, I think the carrot on the racetrack, or that's just like the perfect analogy, right? Because you will never actually catch it, because you will not actually get that back from your boss, right? It will
Right.
just keep you running in circles forever, and wondering why at the end, you're so drained. And like, so, over the body of the book, I tell the stories of different types of work through workers who do them and who are organizing in that field. And so everything from, video game programmers to retail workers, everybody sort of had this moment of realizing that like the job that had promised them all of this stuff, whether they worked at Toys R Us or this one video game company that brands itself as a fampany, which like,
God.
yeah. And, in any of those cases, though, there's always that moment where they realize that they're pouring all of these pieces of themselves really into this job. And then they just get smacked in the face with the fact that like that doesn't matter, you know?
Right.
And like I've had good bosses. I worked for Laura Flanders. I still love Laura. She's still great to me,
Uh-huh.
but that is the exception rather than the rule. And there are people who do genuinely try to like run a good workplace. And I think that that's laudable. It's also sort of not enough, right? Because the structure of the thing means that whether you like it or not, in that position, you are still dealing with the sort of dictates of capitalism. And that means that like, however good a boss you want to be, you are still dealing with like the real pressures that get placed on you to have enough money to pay everybody and to divide up that money in some way that feels fair, and of needing people to work more than you can pay them for it, all sorts of pressures that happen even to like the best, most, radical boss. You're still in this sort of structural position that is, screwy. And like, of course, the people who tell you that your workplace is a family are very often the worst boss, not the best boss. If you have to tell people that the workplace is a family, it ain't a family. I mean, the workplace is never a family. But, if your boss is trying to tell you how great the workplace is, that's because you won't actually figure it out on your own. If you're actually going to enjoy working there,
And not all families. So
I start the book with that question too, don't I?
Yeah, absolutely. So we take this fundamental human emotion, we try to apply it to profit creation for others, which is really what work for most people is.
Right.
And it's true, by the way, more and more if you're a musician, songwriter, for example, more than ever. I used to joke from my songwriting days that there's a band out there that owes me $50 and I want it, for royalties for songs that I wrote for them. And they made records. And so, but now on Spotify, that would be 5 cents,
right, yeah.
So again, musicians are laboring for the wealth of others. Artists are laboring for the wealth of others.
Yeah.
Regular, people in regular jobs are laboring for the wealth of others. And I feel as if this exploitative culture has expanded. Well, I'll be perfectly honest. I worked directly for Bernie Sanders on his first campaign, and very few people I admire as much as I admire Bernie Sanders, but he was a tough boss, and he was a tough boss because he had a mission, right?
Yeah.
But he was also, I think, a tough boss because he, and to a lesser extent I, come from a culture of, tough bossdom, for lack of a better term, where just like, no, come on, yeah, show up, you do your work,
It's a good Bernie impression.
And don't get me started. But in my view, but on the one hand, it was like I admired, and he never asked anything of others. He didn't ask of himself and so on. But
right, yeah.
And I admired him tremendously for working so hard and expecting others to work so hard. But there's part of me that says, like, leaving Bernie aside for a second, just in general, even if you're working for a nonprofit, even if you're working for progressive journalism or whatever, that maybe our culture, bosses don't, just the boss worker relationship is poisoned somehow. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. I mean, it's a real, it's a power thing, right? No matter what it is, it's still a power dynamic. And it's still at the end of the day, like they are trying to get more work out of you than you probably want to give. And whether that is, and, I write too about sort of nonprofits and mission driven organizations. And the worker that I focus on in that chapter is from Planned Parenthood. And, she's very, very motivated by really believing in the work that she does, and also really believing in like the political mission of the organization. And also like her working conditions were really bad. And she was getting paid very little money to do this, like, on the one hand, like skilled medical caring labor, right? She was a clinic assistant. And on the other hand, like you go to work at Planned Parenthood and you're literally walking through a line of protesters every morning and getting, death threats on the phone.
Absolutely.
And, James O'Keefe trying to put up sting videos of you selling baby parts, right? Like there's just so much that goes with that job, and doing it for $12.50 an hour is just like, that's designed to burn people out. I think my biggest problem with it, and this is the thing about it, that it really makes me mad when it's sort of movement organizations that I believe in, is like, that is designed to burn through caring, committed activists like Ashley in a couple of years and just keep replacing them with more people that you can pay $12 an hour, and assuming that there will be an endless stream of people who are devoted to the movement. And what that does is it burns those people out on the movement. Like Ashley is still committed, but how many people have worked in one of those kinds of workplaces? And I don't want to just beat up on Planned Parenthood here because there are lots of them. How many people have been a union staffer because we all know the unions do this
Right.
too, right?
Oh yeah.
For a
Yeah.
couple of years, and then they give up and they go take a job at, I mean, probably not straight to Wall Street, but like there are all sorts of things you can do that will pay you more money and treat you better than that. And we cannot expect to have like a sustainable movement that, keeps people around as long as Bernie Sanders has been around if it's built on burning people out.
Well, that's right. And I mean, and part of what I was thinking of, and I think it's true of the Planned Parenthood worker you profiled. I think it can be even
Yeah.
true of someone as great as Bernie. That, for example, they may want you to do X, Y, and Z. You may know that X, Y, and Z isn't the best use of your resources, right?
Right.
But because it's a hierarchical structure, uh, you don't get to say, well, I don't think I should do X, Y. Maybe you do sometimes, but there's no process for that. There's no culture for it being a mutual flow of
Right.
power and ideas. And one of the other guests on this program, regular on the program, is Richard Wolff, the economist,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and Rick Wolff is big on, and rightfully so, I think, on democracy in the
Mm-hmm.
workplace.
Yeah.
That it's the one area of our lives where we have no democratic, well, most life areas we don't, where we overtly have no democratic
Right.
say.
Exactly.
And I'm wondering, given that work won't love you back, if we kind of think, which is the title of my guest book, Work Won't Love You Back, Sarah Jaffe, the I'm wondering to what extent the solutions involve workplace
Yeah.
democracy as well as unionization,
Yeah.
worker ownership,
Mm-hmm.
minimum guaranteed
Right. Yeah.
income, job guarantee. There are a million. There's a cloud of solutions
Yeah.
floating out there, ideas, many of which are really good, and yet it seems to be a universally understood fact that work is, as I so inelegantly put it, sucks. But there seems to be anything but a
Yeah.
universal shared understanding that it can even be fixed,
Yeah.
much less how to fix it. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a two-pronged thing, right? One of them is giving workers more power in the workplace. That is what we talk about when we talk about workplace democracy, right? Whether that's worker ownership or good, strong unions, once again, like we need many more of those. And the other one is just less work. We just need to work less. We're literally setting
Right.
the planet on fire. It was 120 something degrees in British Columbia the other day, and the entire town caught fire. And I spent the day learning about pyroconvective events, which is when a fire makes it so hot that then there's a thunderstorm caused by the fire that then lightning comes down and sets more things on fire. And so we're literally just like cooking the planet in ways that I had never even heard of. And we're doing that in order to produce a bunch of crap we don't need.
Right.
And so that Jeff Bezos can go to space. And we just
Right.
don't need to do that. We don't need to buy all the crap from Amazon. We don't need to have Amazon produce all this crap, or Amazon's not producing anything, but Amazon's just shuffling it around. We just don't need to live the way that we live. And the idea that we need to work 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week while Jeff Bezos accumulates however many $1 billion it is on his way to being the world's first trillionaire is ludicrous, right? The way we live is insane. And a big part of letting go of the way we live, because we literally have to do this to stop the planet cooking and people literally living in places that are too hot for human bodies to handle, is to slow down production. And that means slowing work way the hell down, staying home, smell the roses, hang out with your friends in parks, which is what I've been doing in this London sort of semi-post-pandemic summer. And yeah, take some time off. So, Iceland, bless the Icelandic, right? Just did a very successful trial of a 4-day work week. And turns out it's great. Turns out lots of people want to try this. Other places are looking at this. Basic income is something that people often mention alongside shorter working hours, right? It's just certainly gone up in popularity since the pandemic, since we learned that we could do it because the government did in fact send everybody a check a couple of times. And so I think, we have to start thinking about this stuff because we're setting the planet on fire, but also because the way we live now is not making us happy. It's not giving us anything of real value for all of the time we spend at work. And so I think, the way we get to less work in some ways is connected to the first question, which is like workers with more power can demand to work less. This is where we got the weekend, right? Like the early days of the labor movement, the unifying demand was first the 10-hour day. Actually, first it was the 12-hour day. Let's be real. It's like bringing it down to 12 hours, then bringing it down to 10, then bringing it down to 8,
Right,
which we
sure.
somehow got stuck on 8. But the 8-hour day is not natural. The 5-day week is not natural. And fewer people are actually working those regular schedules anyway. So we might as well shake it up more, take it down to 4, take it down to 3, 2, go back to George Jetson.
Well, it's so interesting because, first of all, I noticed in one of your chapter titles, speaking of the 80s, you quote, or maybe 70s, Elvis Costello, Welcome to the Working Week.
Yep.
But the song that occurred to me while you were talking, that nobody, I don't know if anyone would write it anymore, everybody's working for the weekend. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
now you're not even allowed to think, I can't wait until the weekend comes. First of all, because you probably don't have it off anymore.
Yeah.
And secondly, because it's like, what, you don't love work? So, I mean, that's the insidiousness of it. And the other very different quote that came to mind while I was reading your book, actually, but came back to
Yeah.
mind now, was the 19th century British social critic and writer John Ruskin once
Mm.
said during the Industrial Revolution, he said it was gendered, because of the times, but he said, let me see if I get it right. He said you can either make uh, a man out of the creature or you can make a tool out of the creature, but you cannot do both.
Mm.
So to me, I mean, that's at the heart of what your book is saying,
Yeah.
is that we are creatures who are being made tools through this
Mhm.
psychology that
Yeah.
includes you love your work, so that our essence becomes that of a tool that loves, pretends to love, because none of us really do, being a tool. But
Right.
if we're to be human rather than tools, we have to throw off that psychic architecture that they've
Yeah.
locked down on us. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I just have to note that I live, there's a John Ruskin Street on the other side of my flat
Ah,
here. So, um, yeah, I also, I'm literally wearing my William Morris blazer because I keep talking about William Morris, who's obviously kind of a contemporary of Ruskin and a
yes.
similar thinker in some ways. And William Morris wrote a wonderful essay on useful work versus useless toil, right? And he spent a lot of
Ah,
time thinking about what would make work pleasurable. And his first thing was hope of rest, right? You need some time off,
that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
hope of product, which basically meant you could control the thing you were making. So he was an artist who designed all these wonderful prints that now I have on a jacket. And then it was hope of pleasure in the work itself. And that was sort of the third one.
Right.
And Morris was a little bit skeptical that we could achieve any of this under capitalism because capitalism sort of requires misery from some in order that a very small number can accumulate a whole bunch of stuff.
And in a way, Morris's comments were uh, not unrelated to Marx's concept of
Mm-hmm.
alienation,
Yeah,
right? I
absolutely.
mean, so which you also referenced there.
Yes.
So before I let you go, Sarah, I mean, there's so much more I could talk to you about in the book, but
I know we could go on for a
uh,
while.
I might have you back. But before I let you go, is there anything else germane that I have forgotten to ask you that you might want our audience to know, other than the book is for sale at independent booksellers everywhere?
The book is for sale at good at fine booksellers everywhere, and you don't have to buy it from Amazon. And yeah, I just think that this is a moment where, because of the pandemic, so many people's experiences of work have sort of been thrown up in the air in a variety of ways, and they're coming down now, and we're being expected to go back as though there's a normal we can go back to. And the reality is that like that normal was killing us. So it's a perfect time to think about the ways we could live that wouldn't be killing us quite so fast and quite so horribly.
And it's a great time to get rid of the mind forged manacles, as William Blake said. Probably also one of your neighbors there. Uh, so and your book does a great contribution towards that. So again, the book is entitled Work Won't Love You Back: How Devotion to Our Jobs Keeps Us Exploited, exhausted and alone, Sarah Jaffe. Thanks for writing it, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.